Okay guys, today I'm going to talk about some Tervigon and Gaunt tactics. Got the camera on the tripod so I can have both my hands free. Um, you have to excuse me for this guy not being painted. I only got him the other day, so it's a work in progress, but obviously, yeah, this is what you have to deal with. Okay, so Tervigon and Gaunt combination is probably the most common thing in the sort of current Tyranid army. Reason being is because it's awesome. Everyone that plays Tyranids will probably agree and probably knows this, and rightly so. The reason why it's so awesome is obviously for those that play Tyranids and know these things, and for the people that don't, this guy, the big white Tervigon dude, spawns Gaunts every turn. So if you consider most of the missions are now objective based, we'll get some of these objectives in. It makes it really easy to claim multiple objectives in a single game, because you start the game with 2-3 scoring units. You can finish the game, anywhere up to 9, even 10 scoring units on the board. So it really does help in that matter. The reason why it works so effectively is because you take 10 gaunts, you take 10 of these dudes, you make this guy a troop. So he's also a scoring unit. So along with all your gaunt units, you also have the Tervigon itself as a scoring unit. So that's a little bit, why the theory of why people take Gaunts and Tervigons is they're just very useful. I'm getting a bit of glare from the window over there. But let's talk a little bit about sort of combinations and the build. Now, Gaunts are cheap. In my opinion, you should always keep them cheap. So no upgrades on the Gaunts. Just field them as they are with the flesh borers. Broods of 10 up to 20 bigger points games. I think broods of 10 work well. As my tactical thing develops further, understand why broods of 10 is more than enough for the way the army plays. So you keep the gaunts playing as. My recommendation is at 1500 points, take 2 broods of 10, and then for every sort of 250 jump, add another brood of 10 in. Just helps flood the board with a bit of bodies and upkeep the scoring unit count. So this guy is the important part of the combination, is the Tervigon. Now my Tervigon I run pretty much tooled to the teeth. He has the crushing claws, he has the toxin sacs stuck on his leg there, the adrenal glands on the other side. Yeah, so he has pretty much most of the upgrades. He takes the second power, so I can swap out 2 for Biomancy. But yeah, he really is, he's got all of the important upgrades. I wouldn't bother so much with the regen, because it's quite expensive for what you get. I would recommend taking the cluster spines, the strength 5 large blast, because you're more likely to hit with it and do more damage, because it's just quite a fairly low ballistic skill. The crushing claws actually makes him a pretty good beast in combat, plus D3 attacks. He gets 4 on the charge anyway. If you're looking to roll warp speed, this guy can have 10 attacks on the charge. Always nice. So this guy has everything, but the important ones he has is adrenal glands and toxin sacs. Now, the reason why those are so important, because any gaunt brood within 6 inches, so if one guy from a brood is within 6 inches of him, the whole brood gets to use his adrenal glands and toxin sacs, which makes the gaunts on the charge statistically better than Space Marines in combat. They've got the same initiative. Against most targets, they're going to be hitting the same. They're going to be hitting on 4s most of the time. The strength 4 on the charge, and most of the time they're going to be re-rolling the 4+ or the 3+ to wound. And if they're not re-rolling it, they always wound on a 4+. So it really makes them a devastating threat on the charge, and a lot of people I play against underestimate gaunts in combat, because they're 2 attacks each, hitting on 4s and it's whatever, but just the amount of wounds they can dish out is amazing. So this guy is a linchpin of the gaunt unit. You think a 6-inch spread, 6 inches this side, 6 inches that side, you can get a good coverage of the board from just one Tervigon, which moves nice on to my next point. Personally, I think 1 Tervigon is enough. Taking 2 Tervigons I think is a bit overkill. especially considering that I like to tool them right up to the teeth. But I think taking 2 is you can end up with too many Gaunts and not enough good stuff. The awesomeness of the Tyranid Codex means you've got a lot of awesome things. And I'm going to do a generic video on sort of the Tyranid theory that I like to apply on the tabletop as to why having more different things is better rather than trying to spam one thing. So, you know, the sort of 2-3 Tervigon lists are good, but you can end up with far too many Gaunts and not really much else, in my opinion. So that's, you know, how you build the Tervigon, how you build the Gaunts. Now let's look at sort of how you use them. So we know why they're in there, because they claim objectives, and you get a pretty solid base around the Tervigon, who makes the Gaunts themselves pretty awesome. I forgot to mention they also get to use his leadership, which is leadership 10. So, I mean, they're fearless anyway, but it can help for things like, you know, now more people can take Psychic Shriek from the telepathy discipline. It makes these Gaunts pretty resilient to things like that. Also things like Mind Shackle Scarabs, other things that make you test on your leadership that, you know, like the Doom of Malantai, even if you're fearless, you still test. So if I'm playing against another Tyranid player with the Doom, it just makes these guys a little more, less likely to die, things like that. So we'll talk about how we use them and how we set up. Now personally, if I was playing, say we'll assume this is the board, just move the Tervigon for a second, you know, like this is my side of the board, this is a ruin in my deployment zone. When you play, if you're playing objectives and you're deploying, one objective in your deployment zone in terrain. Now the reason why we do this, if you think when you're playing on the board and you set up, just clear this area, you have your Tervigon on the board, okay, and you have your Gaunt, your brood of Gaunts. There's no point starting them in terrain, mainly because other things on the board are going to take the hits first, and what you want to try and do is get the balance between making your opponent want to shoot at your Gaunts but not kill them, because inevitably you're going to need your Gaunts to take objectives. So what you want to do is make them a bit of a juicy threat, but not so much so that they're going to be wiped out, and it is quite difficult to do. But the reason why we start them out outside of cover, but you put objective in cover, is later on in the game, if your Tervigon is still alive, you're going to want him to go, you know, move up to midfield. You want him to go and start pressuring things, claim a midfield objective. And, you know, he has toughness 6 with 6 wounds. If he rolls Iron Arm, he can put to toughness 9. Now, toughness 9 scoring unit with 6 wounds, and with as many attacks on the charge as he can potentially get, it really does make him a scary prospect. So, you know, you're looking turn 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 potentially. You want him to then walk off. You know, you spend the first half of the game keeping the synapse bubble precisely where you want it to be. But then late game, you want to move off. You want him to claim another objective midfield. You want him to stem an assault that your opponent may be throwing at you. So he's going to go. And what that's going to mean is your Gaunts are likely to fail their instinctive behaviour test. Now, the instinctive behaviour test for Gaunts is to lurk. Now, if you fail that, it's just I don't have any dice, but let's say leadership 5, chances are you're going to fail. Now, the rules for lurk says you have to shoot all your weapons at your nearest target. Okay, you have a 12-inch range. If you're in your opponent zone, it's unlikely that anything's going to be in range. So, then what you do is you have to move into the nearest piece of terrain. So if you've been clever with your setup, when these guys lurk, they're just going to lurk into the terrain onto the objective. So they've fulfilled 2 purposes in this game. They have been an interesting target for your opponent, because these are your scoring units, and chances are people are going to try and kill scoring units. But more than that, they have taken the fire off your more important targets, things like Trigons, Hive Tyrants, Zone Probes, Hive Guard, things of that nature that are going to be in the army. If they've done that and still been alive, even if it's just 2 Gaunts, they're just going to run and they're going to sit on objective, and that's fine, because then they've done exactly what they're going to do all game. Hey, and what if anyone gets close to threaten the guys? Well, then you just move this guy back within 12 inches, and they instantly become fearless again. So it's very hard to clear Gaunts off an objective, particularly if they're fearless, particularly if you can't reliably, get the wounds on them. And always remember, when the Tervigon has left the vicinity and these guys are no longer fearless, just go to ground. You're in an area terrain ruin, you're getting a 2+ cover save. If you're in trees, it's a 3+ cover save. It's going to be extremely hard to shake off the objective. And this is how I use my guns. I keep them as live as long as possible, which is standard. And that's pretty much all it takes, is the balance between having your Tervigon as the aggressor to go forward, become the main target over the Gaunts, and then just let your Gaunts mop up the objectives. And I can't really stress anything more simple than that. We'll need to say that you should always put your objectives into terrain. Now you may run the risk of taking the mysterious terrain things. If you roll a bad one, if this is say a wood, you could roll the razor wing nest or whatever, but it's not ultimately detrimental to the Tyranid army. So just something to think about when, again, it brings in the theory of objective placement. So make sure you're putting your objectives in terrain, keep the Gaunts nearby, don't move them up too far. It doesn't even matter if this is your board edge here, right at the edge of the board, just keep them right on the edge of the board. They don't need to do anything. All they need to do is stay alive to get objectives, and if they do that, then they're fulfilling their purpose, so always remember that. With the Tervigon, he is really, on taking the whole picture, a synapse bubble, but he also, remember, he bestows his abilities onto the Gaunt units around him, but if he dies, he also can kill the Gaunt units around him. Excuse me, guys. So all in all, I think for the first half of the game, you want to use this guy as your bunker. Sit him, if you've got 2 objectives, we have one, say, here in terrain, and then we have one here in terrain, so there's 2 different pieces of terrain. Sit him in the middle, with Gaunts behind, and then you can reliably claim 2 objectives. Whoa, this is the camera. So yeah, you want to keep him close to both objectives in the middle, and then late game he can move off, go to midfield for an objective. Again, make him a target. If coming to the end of the game, you've got the objectives and he's rolling towards it, you've got to make your opponent think, what do I want to target? And that is the way the Tyranids play, and I'm going to get onto that pretty much right now. So that's how I use Tervigons and Gaunts. It works well for me. I think it's how Gaunts should be played. A lot of people like to use them in a sacrificial manner as a screen. I personally don't think that's a good thing to do, simply because they are very fragile, very, very weak, likely to die, and inevitably you're throwing away scoring units. I think they work much better in the the backfield role, the spine of the army, supported by a Tervigon, and yeah, that's it. So I hope you've learned something, guys, and I'm going to get on with more 6th edition Tyranid videos. Okay, cool. Later.